Hi, this is Mark Farnham with Apologetics for the Church, and we are back with another Every Believer Confident podcast. And I have with me today our research assistant, Jeff Mindler.
Good to be here.
Yeah, what are we talking about today?
So today, I floated the idea out to Mark beforehand about the different types of questioners or questions that we as Christians might receive, and being aware of discerning those different types of questions or questioners, and just having the wisdom to know what somebody's asking, but also where that question might be coming from.
Okay, so let's talk about different types of questions or questioners.
Yeah, so the first one that I thought of, and I have three. I mean, there might be more. So this is not an exhaustive, final list, but there were just three that I immediately came to my mind. The first one was those people asking questions that are genuinely asking questions and seeking for answers. They might be struggling to understand a particular teaching of the Bible or a doctrine or something about church history, and they're genuinely looking for answers and looking for, okay, what does the Bible teach? Help me to understand it. And so those are people who are genuinely asking, and they're looking for an answer, and they're willing to wrestle with the material to find that answer.
So these are not people trying to trip you up or corner you or stump you.
No, and we'll get to those types of people later. But this, just for the sake of this first category, these are people who have genuine questions, and they are hungry to actually find those answers. And a lot of times this could be just people in the pews next to us who maybe they've been Christians for a while, and they're looking to dive a little deeper into their faith, or maybe they've had a coworker ask them or raise objections to Christianity, and so they're really wanting to dive deeply into biblical and theological matters to seek answers, but either for themselves or maybe to help others. But at the end of the day, they are genuinely interested in finding the answers and wrestling with those questions.
So what would be some indications that you're dealing with that kind of person?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of indications. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is, I think, somebody who is patient in waiting through some of these, recognizing that some of these questions are complex in nature.
So the person who comes to you and says, I need an answer right now, or I'm walking out the door and leaving my faith behind, that would be an indication that they're not that type of person.
It could be. I think I'd have some more questions for that person, like, okay, where is this urgency coming from? That would be one of my questions is, why right now is this such a pivotal moment where, you feel like you need an answer right now or else everything's over? Like, why the urgency? Yeah. So that'd be a good question I want to ask them. Okay.
But basically, you're looking for people who, when you make a point, concede that you are correct or that answers their question, or they are willing to ask multiple questions and be patient with the response.
Yeah, and even willing to, hey, would you be open to reading a book on this question? Because it's, say the problem of evil. That's a very big question that has a lot of component parts into it, as far as the nature of who God is, his sovereignty and decree, the nature of sin and mankind. So there's a lot of pieces there. And if they're willing, hey, let's read this book. It's not going to be an easy book, because that's not a easy question in that regard. And if they're willing to, let's read and let's meet up every week and discuss it, though, that's a sign that, okay, this person seems to be more willing to really wrestle with this and is looking for an answer.
Okay. What's another type of person that you might come across?
So the other type of person I thought of, this was the kind of the second one, was a person who might be asking questions, but the type of questions they're asking are really a smokescreen for something else. Maybe they're asking, a particular question over here, but what they really are wrestling with, or maybe what they're really objecting to, is a different topic altogether. And so they ask this question here to kind of appear inquisitive or that they're really trying to do their homework, but they're really maybe not looking for an answer. It's just a smokescreen to hide maybe some of their other doubts or questions that they have.
So how would you know if you're talking to that kind of person?
I mean, it would depend on the type of questions being asked. I always like to try to find, the question of, okay, what originally caused this question to come to mind? Was there something behind that? What makes you think that? Is a great question to ask her. That's a really good question. What initially prompted that question? As a way to really try to uncover some of, what's going on. And that's where, answering questions with further clarifying questions can be really helpful. And that's, a lot of what apologetics is learning how to ask good questions. And we can do that even with people asking questions themselves.
Right. One of the things I've discovered that might tip me off to this kind of person is someone who has multiple questions that even when you answer their questions and provide closure on that issue, they keep coming back with more and more because it seems like they're throwing up all these obstacles in the way. And if you're able to, if they give you the time to answer all of them, eventually they'll say, well, that's fine. You give me answers, but I don't want to have to stop sleeping with my girlfriend, or I don't want to have to stop, drinking on the weekends. And then you really get to the heart of the issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great example of oftentimes when people have intellectual objections, there's usually, if not always, something underlying that's moral or ethical that I've seen in my experience, and I've heard from others as well of, people typically don't ask intellectual questions in a vacuum.
That's right.
There's a context, and this is where it's helpful to recognize that we as people made in God's image, we have intellects, but we also have wills and mind and the heart and emotions and all these other factors that go into who we are. And so people make decisions and choices for a variety of reasons. So it could be helpful to uncover what some of those reasons are.
It's good to remember, too, that people are not just a brain on a stick, which is a term that's used a lot to say we're not just our minds. And so if I encounter someone that has intellectual objections, I will try to answer those, but I also understand their fundamental problem is rebellion against God. And so at some level, there are heart questions involved in their objections or in their opposition to the truth of Christianity. And I want to try to get to those because the heart questions often override completely any intellectual objections. And so don't ignore that. It's not just intellectual objections.
Right. And that leads naturally to the third type of questioner or question that came to mind was those who, when asking questions, are not really seeking answers, they're seeking exits. And I learned this from a book by Elisa Childers and Tim Barnett on the deconstruction of Christianity and just interacting with this. And they brought up this point of not all the time when people ask questions are they actually looking for answers. That's right. Sometimes they're looking for an escape hatch, an exit plan of, well, I asked these questions and nobody could answer. I mean, how many times when you look at deconstruction or deconversion stories, how many times does that come up?
So true. Yeah, no one could ever answer my questions.
Yeah.
I asked these questions for years and my pastors would never give me an answer, which, could be true.
Be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on the church, could very be true.
But sometimes it's because they don't want an answer.
Yeah. And maybe the pastor or elder or whoever they've been talking with has given them a intellectually satisfying answer, but again, it's the heart issue that, their mind, okay, yeah, that makes sense, but I just can't accept it because of some other underlying motive or underlying driving force there. But yeah, that objection, I mean, I've seen it countless times of just nobody could answer my questions. And I would love to ask them, like, well, who were you asking them to?
That's right. And are you open to getting an answer now? If no one could answer before, That doesn't necessarily mean it's unanswerable. It could just mean that you haven't met the right kind of person who has the knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. And
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, a great question, to kind of uncover this is, just asking them, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how open are you to actually really digging into this? And ask them to rate themselves on that scale to find out, are they a 3? And that's kind of like, okay, maybe they're not as open as they really say that they are.
What would you say to someone then if they said I'm a 1 or a 2 or a 3 as far as openness?
I mean, there'd be a variety of different questions. One of them, if they're at a rock bottom 1, like you can't get any lower than that, I'd simply ask them, what would it look like, or what would it take to get you to a 2? Just a simple, like, we're not trying to move them up all the way to the scale, but just to work with them step by step of like, okay, what would it take you to get to just one more up? And I think that'll really show, because when you ask a question like that, they're forced to think through, okay, what would that look like? And depending on the reasons, you'll be able to see really quickly, I think, how open they actually are to talking about these things.
And I think that scale of 1 to 10 also challenges them to be honest with whether they really are looking for answers or not. The founder of the local Free Thought Society atheist group here in Lancaster one time told me, when asked, what would it take for you to be convinced of the truth of Christianity, he was honest and said, actually, there's nothing you could show me that would make me believe. And that pointed out his closed-mindedness, which ironically, at the time, he was the founder of the Free Thought Society. So it wasn't all that free, and it's not anyways.
Yeah, and that really reveals something we talked about earlier of the issue of it's not just an intellectual issue, but there's a heart issue that if there is nothing that I could present to somebody that would convince them of this, then it shows that, okay, this is not an intellectual issue.
That's right.
This is a heart issue, that there needs to be a renewal of the mind and of the heart through regeneration, and hence why our apologetic is built upon and relies upon God's word, because that's what he uses to take out hearts of stone and to give believing hearts of flesh.
That's good. This has made me think of possibly a 4th category, but it might just land in the 3rd. A friend of mine who's a very accomplished apologist talks about in C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy in Book 3, That Hideous Strength, where there's a character known as the Unman. And the main character, Ransom, is trying to talk with him, reason with him, and the Unman just keeps muttering Ransom's name over and over again. In other words, this person has zero interest in even having a reasonable dialogue. And my friend's point is simply, you can't have a discussion with the Unman. If someone is just trying to irritate or to frustrate you, don't waste your time because they are not open to hearing reason, and therefore we should not expend a lot of effort on them. And sometimes I see Christians see that as a challenge. Oh, I've met someone who's completely irrational. I'm going to devote all my time and effort to trying to convince them to become rational, and I would say that is a wasted effort. You can pray for that person as we would anyone, but don't spend your time trying to convince the Unman.
Yeah, I was going to ask what would be your encouragement to maybe fellow believers if they are interacting with someone, or they know maybe a family member or a friend that is very hardened in that regard. How would you encourage them? You mentioned prayer.
Prayer is sometimes the only thing that can be done. Prayer and patience to realize life will eventually bring into their experience suffering, difficulty, frustration, a challenge of their morals, and to be ready when that happens then to raise the conversation again, because people do not live in a vacuum. They're going to experience difficulty. Their true selves are going to be exposed at some point, and that's an opportunity for a Christian to bring up again the issue of truth and the Christian faith and the gospel.
Yeah, and that's a great reminder that the hardest of hearts is no match for the triune God.
That's right.
When the Spirit desires to take out that heart of stone and give a heart of flesh, there is nothing in heaven or earth that can stop him from accomplishing his purposes. So
think about the Apostle Paul. His life goal was to completely destroy the church, imprison and kill Christians, and Christ confronted him. So that's the hope we retain, is that God can do that with anyone.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for listening. If you'd like to help support the work of Apologetics for the Church and this podcast, Every Believer Confident, you can go to our website, apologeticsforthechurch.org, and hit donate and support us there. We are a listener-supported ministry, and our goal is to equip millions of believers to effectively engage unbelievers with the gospel for the glory of God, the salvation of the world, and the strengthening of the church.